Hi guys, thanks for coming again. My name is Alex. I teach A1 here at the American home. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about maybe a question that you guys often ask yourselves a lot. Why is English so weird? Why is it the way it is? It's very unlike any other language that we have here on this planet. And I feel like it would be interesting to have a look into why it is the way it is today. What has influenced English into becoming what it is today? By looking at the history, a little bit of the grammar, and just trying to make sense of all these strange little grammatical details that we have to keep in mind when we learn this language here. So let's get started. First of all, when we talk about classifying the language, that is, what kind of a language is it? What family of languages does it belong to? Well, of course, we know that it's an Indo-European language, which includes a lot like Slavic, Romance, Germanic, some languages from Persian. What do you call it? Like anything like that in the farther east, like related to Hindi or something like that. And it's strange to think about because when we look at the number of words that English has, a lot of these words actually come from languages like Latin or French. You can see here, about 60% of our lexicon is composed of words from Latin and French. We, of course, do have a lot of words from Germanic and then some Greek and some other loan languages here. So it's actually funny because I was talking to my uncle a few years ago and he said this sentence and he implied that English was a Romance language. And I'm like, what, really? But then you look at this and okay, you can see why. And he's a doctor too, so he deals with these Latin and French related words a lot more in his field. So that got me thinking, maybe not everyone knows like where English exactly belongs. So of course we have a lot of words from Latin and French when we talk about government here, with Congress, legislation, judge, judiciary. One of our nation's famous motto, E pluribus unum, one nation out of many, one nation out of many states. It's on the back of your pennies too, coins and everything. Of course, that's directly Latin. That's not even, they didn't even try to translate that. They just kept the Latin as it was. And some other words as well from French and Latin. This is the case with Russian as well. A lot of our culinary terms and coinages come from the French. Entree, hors d'oeuvres, different kinds of meats, pork, beef, veal, all of these words come from the French language. I know that's the case in many cultures too. I know you have many of these words in Russian as well. So that's nothing new there. Another thing we took from French, and especially French, is this suffix shun. And we can only use this shun when we have some kind of French or Latin root here. So you would never see this root tion on any word that is Germanic here. You can only use this affix really for French words here. Transportation, or Latin of course, invention, election, all of these have French and Latin roots from these languages here. Same with the suffix bl or bul, sometimes able, sometimes able, such as desirable, comfortable, affordable, and such down the line. Usually it can be used as a suffix to make a verb into some kind of adjective. Something that you despise is despicable, something that you can afford is affordable. Not for every word, but in general it can be used as one of those suffixes here. And of course we get this from French as well. Of course, the education system uses a lot of these suffixes here, or has a lot of terminology from Latin here. The word university itself is a Latin word. Same with the syllabus, the plans that we create for studying. Same with curriculum, how we outline the plan. Once you graduate from school, you can graduate if you have achieved a lot in your college career. You can graduate with certain honors, with cum laude, magna cum laude, or summa cum laude, with the greatest honor. That is the highest honor. And then, of course, once you graduate, you are considered an alumnus or an alumna. Something I really hate is when people say, I'm an alumni, and that's not right. Are you a graduate? No, of course not. You're an alumnus or an alumna. It's the plural, so you can't say in plural sentences. So stupid. I hate it. But I mean, of course, not everyone took Latin, so I understand in that sense. But it's not that hard, it's just 2 words. When we talk about general terms for labor, labor itself being a direct word from Latin, or about chemistry or any kind of science here. A lot of these words and a lot of elements on the periodic table have their names directly from words from Latin, such as aurum for gold, same with argentum from Latin silver. The art of repairing pipes or fixing how the function of the house works is called plumbing, right from the Latin for plumbus for lead here. So you can see a lot of influence from Greek and Latin in chemistry and work. And just some other words here: difficult, cliche, education, distribute, words that are kind of fused from Latin and French into each other, and that are very important, very common in our everyday speech. So now that we've taken a look at how many words that we have from Latin and French, nevertheless we can't consider English to be a Romance language, even though most of its vocabulary is composed of French and Latin words, because that's not how it works. When we categorize the language, we look at the roots of the language, from where it originated. It's the same thing if you think about your friends. If this is your mom and your dad and mom, and there's you here, you're connected, you have your roots with them. Even if your cool friend here has a bad influence on you, or you have more habits that relate to your friend, you're not related to your friend, you look to your parents from who you came from. So it's the same thing with language. Languages have their own family trees here. That's why no matter how many words we've taken from Latin or French, we consider it Germanic, as we will see right here. So this is a family tree of Germanic languages. Again, another subsection of Indo-European languages. We start further back to Northwest and East Germanic, all the way down here, and here is English here, and some other modern-day Germanic languages, which you might recognize: Icelandic, Norwegian, German. Over here, Afrikaans and Dutch are very close here. One thing you might notice here is that English actually has kind of a sister language here, Frisian, which isn't very wide-spoken in Europe, in the Brittonic Isles in northern France, but it is actually a living language today. And even though there's kind of brothers and sisters in this context here, they're really nothing alike here. I'll give you an example to hear some Frisian here. Maybe you can make out some words. See how discernible they are.
Praat maar Fries, omdat we verder binnen.
Topmodel Duitsers zal de Friese taal de vrouw doorbrengen. Ze is vregen van de eigen campagne Praat maar Fries van de AVOC om de Friese taal te stimuleren. Voor Duitsers is het heel gewoon om in haar taal te praten.
De voeten dat de Praat maar Fries campagne heb ik altijd zoiets van ik met Friesland. Het is net een steunen, maar het is meer van ja, je verloren in net wat je bij komen. Ik vind het belangrijk en ik praat altijd Fries. Ik stuur dus sms'jes in Fries, e-mail in Fries. Dus dat gaat altijd terug.
Alright, enough of that. So did you catch anything? A little bit. If you know Dutch or German, you might have picked up some words here or there, because as we see, we're not too far from Dutch, and actually, for English speakers, Swedish is actually one of the easiest languages to know. We have a lot of cognates, common words. And Dutch also is considered to be fairly easy. So it's no surprise that Frisian is actually a lot similar to Dutch, or in terms of how it sounds here. But again, despite how many words we have in English from Latin and French, the core words of a language are usually very difficult to influence. What do we mean by the most common words? I have stuff like here: man, different adjectives like hard or easy, world, need, day. These are words that aren't as able to be changed as others. When we talk about university or work, these are higher levels of living, and not every culture will have words for education or syllabus, or more terms related to medical stuff. We talk about the most basic forms of stuff, like hands, our body parts, our family members, nature. All of these are very difficult to change, and because of that, when we look at the most basic of these words here, we said that there is, in actuality, a resemblance with other Germanic languages here. So we have some most common, the core words of a language here, just some samples here from English, Swedish, German, and then let's contrast them with Latin here, which again is, even though we take a lot of words from Latin, it is not in any way related to English. So let's look at the word for man, pretty straightforward here. Then we have weird, again, no relation. We have words like virtuous to describe characteristics of people, but the word for man itself has no relation here. Same with hard or something. We use difficult, we can also use hard, hard, and then robustus or durus, again, no relation. We have durable, robust, but again, no relation there. Words for body parts like hand or knee here. Again, a very close resemblance here. Nothing here. Manus and buka, nothing related. For even like primitive weapons or weapons that were used early on, like a sword. Again, relation but gladius. We have gladiator, but we took that from Latin as well. And for describing basic units of time, day, nights, seasons. Again, no relation here, except for the D. That's really, but that's more of a coincidence, yeah. So, when we look at the words in Old English, English that was spoken 1,000 years ago, we can also see how these core words have changed very little. No, in the sense that if you look at it, you can recognize that there is a resemblance from the modern to the old language here. First of all, I want to point out a few differences here. We have some different letters. We had some different letters in Old English. I'll point out that this letter here is actually a W sound. It's a what, it's not a P. It's a what. So when we look at words like twayin or, where's the animal? Wolf, right there. These aren't, or feowar. It's not a P, it's like a fancy looking P, but it's actually a W sound. We also had these two letters here before. We have F and F, which is basically we have the voiced TH and the, this is voiceless in this. So this is like with, and this is the voice, such as like though. So it's kind of cool. We had two different letters but now we just have one TH. I don't know why we didn't keep this system here. It'd be much more convenient for you guys, I know, when you're reading stuff. Icelandic actually still has these two letters here in its script here, but English lost it over time here. So if we look at some of the words here, let's look at some basic adjectives, such as god. When we have this little dash across the top, it just means it's a long vowel. So if we have something like god here, just rewrite the vowel twice, good. Very easy to see here. Same with hair, high, strong, small, bloody, old, stuff like that. Like the core adjectives here. Numbers are also pretty much more or less unchanged. We have an, which again is from our article N, so that's what we get. A computer, a TV, it's one. That's why we can't use it in the plural. 3, 4, onward. And then we have this other word that's kind of interesting too, other. So here's one marker, here is the other marker. This was our old word for second here. We took second again from Latin, but we used to have our own ordinal number, other. Our pronouns, I know they look weird, but it's not too hard to believe. Each thu, as in thou in Middle English, and eventually you. We actually did used to have two, like you have three and vi. We had the same form with fu and ye as being we. But now we just have one you, and for use it for all situations here. Same with family matters. Father, mother, brother, syster, we actually get from Old Norse. We will talk about that in a few minutes. Animals also, the most basic kind of animals that we have here, like dogs, cats, wolf again. We have this strange phenomenon where the letter or the sound r and the vowel sometimes switch around. So instead of horse, we had hros. Instead of a bird, we had brit. And then cow, goose, body parts here. And again, like nature too. Heaven, earth, water, tree, field, sky. Again, it's from Old Norse. We will talk about that in a few minutes here. So with just a little bit of thought, you can figure out, okay, so these words are in fact more or less the same today there's, besides some little vowel changes and consonant changes, you can see how we really kept our core words, and these were not influenced from Latin and French. Another cool thing we have to talk about is days of the week. So when you classify, when you name the days of the week, this of course varies from culture to culture. Some languages just call it first day, second day, third day. I think Chinese does that. Same with Greek too. They have like the second day, third day, fourth day. And I know you guys have some of that in Russian too. In the style of Romance and Germanic languages, we like to name the days of our week after different gods, or from different elements of nature here. Sunday is, of course, not a god, but it's the day of the sun, just like Latin has the solis. Monday, of course, the moon's day. Latin also had this concept of doing that. Tuesday was the day of Tu, who was the Germanic god of war. Just like in French and Spanish you have Mardi and Martes, we have Tu for our god of war, and we gave him his day there. So it's kind of interesting how we copied the concept, but just took our own god in that sense. Wednesday is another name for the god Odin, who was like the Zeus of the Germanic gods. He had many different names, but of course he had to have his own day, as being the patriarch of the entire family. Thursday, you might know from Thunder's Day, from Thor, who was son of Odin. Friday, of course, is she's the wife of Odin, so she had to have her own day, of course. Didn't have any jealousy there. And then Saturn's Day, which for some reason we took the Roman god Saturn. I don't know why we didn't follow the convention of putting like Sabbath, like Subota, Sabato, Sabado. I don't know why we didn't follow that convention, but so we just took Saturn, I guess. So we can't talk about Old English without mentioning a little bit about this epic poem, Beowulf, which actually, the etymology of his name is interesting too. We have Beo, which you can probably guess is what kind of an animal, it's like a bee, and wolf, although wolf, of course, does mean the actual wolf, it can also be used as a word for hunter. So the hunter of bees is a bear. So it's actually bear. It's a creative way of saying that. We don't know who wrote this epic poem, and we don't know exactly when. Somewhere around 8th century to 12th century, somewhere in that time. It's not exactly known when this epic poem was written. But in summary, it's about this epic hero, of course, named Beowulf, who comes to the aid of his, I believe they were uncle and nephew. He comes to the aid of his uncle Hrothgar, who was a Danish king, who liked to have wild parties in his beer hall every night. But unfortunately, this constant partying disturbed this monster named Grendel, who would come up to the beer hall and slaughter people and then go back to sleep in peace. But this was not enough to stop the Danes from partying. But eventually enough people had died, and it got to the point where Hrothgar asked for help, and Beowulf offered his help to defeat this monster Grendel here. The story takes somewhere around here. It's not exactly known, but around this area here. Of course, the Danish king would be located near Denmark, so somewhere around here. So the epic poem Beowulf has been an inspiration on many other different media and literature. Probably the most notable influence that you might know is The Hobbit, because actually in the last part of the epic poem Beowulf, he becomes king of his own homeland, and unfortunately his home is attacked by a fire dragon because a thief happens to steal something from the dragon, and the dragon takes his wrath out on the townspeople here. Much like when Bilbo from The Hobbit is sent to steal something from Smaug. Smaug emerges from his lair and starts raining fire down on the river town. So that scene is pretty much almost exactly taken from Beowulf here, with the dragon being disturbed by a thief in the night. And then also some other modern games, maybe Skyrim is probably the most popular one with dragons. Anything with dragons or medieval stuff and so it was inspired by Beowulf. So let's read a few lines together. Quat we gardenian jardagum field kuningen thrym gifrunen, hut athningas en fremlun, of should chefing chefana threatum morgum macum. So it's a bit different, right? A little bit different, yeah. So obviously, of course, this is over 1,000 years old. Of course, something's going to be a little bit different, just to show you how much our language has changed from the time. Then you can see some small little overlaps here. That was a good king. Again, good again. König is was the word for king. That was, the word to be was still more or less the same. Here is a scene from where he is fighting Grendel and actually rips his arm out of his shoulder here, right here. So your sinews is like a muscle ligament here, around here. So we got that word. We still keep that word from Old English. Onsprung, like springs out, sprung out, burst, bone joint. See, there's some stuff that we still kept here. Even more examples can be seen in the Lord's Prayer in Old English. Since usually when we recite the Lord's Prayer, we kind of stick close to the Middle English, it's easier to see a lot of the same words here. The bolded words are probably words you could already recognize. Art, heaven, name, will, forgiveness, and then gutes from guilty. He is guilty. He is to blame, so we take that word as well. Do not lead us, and so on like that. A lot of overlap in words here. So why does it seem so different? Why does that first set of lines seem so different from modern English? The thing is that the grammar of Old English was completely different. Back then, English had 5 cases, different conjugations, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and instrumental. So that means that most parts of speech, like adjectives, nouns, even numbers or articles, all declined. Even worse is that we had 3 genders here, many different types of verb types, and we used to mark our vowels like this here. So if you think about it, it had a lot in common with like Russian grammar. Like we have a lot of cases, 3 genders, and a lot like that. That was the kind of the structure of languages back then. Usually languages become a little bit simpler as time goes on. Not always, of course, but that's usually the case here. So just to give you an example of how the different kinds of verbs are nouns that we have, soft nouns and weak nouns here, and all the ways that those can be conjugated. Same thing with different kinds of verbs here, a lot of different variants of verbs. So just be thankful that you don't have to memorize all this nonsense here. So just be glad you were born in this century here where we could actually make sense of all of this. So we can trace the origin of English way back to when these different Germanic tribes, the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons, all immigrated to the Brittonic Isles around the 5th century here. When they moved to the British Isles, of course, there was already a population of people living there who spoke many different Celtic languages here. Which I should mention that Celtic languages are not at all the same as Germanic languages here. They have a very different style, very different appearance here. One thing that happened though, when the Germanic languages came, or German people came and their languages started to mix, is that we started to have some influences. We took some stuff from these Celtic languages. One of the most famous examples that we see in everyday English is this auxiliary verb do, that we only use in negative sentences and questions here. Why not in positive? I don't know, but we got this structure, this usage from these Celtic languages here. So that's just one example of how 2 languages mixing can give us such a weird construction here, because it is very unique to have in language. You never see this anywhere else except in Celtic languages here. And there's no coincidence since these Germanic tribes moved here and their languages mixed. A few centuries later, around the 800s, these people from Scandinavian countries started coming over to the Brittonic Isles, and the language that these people spoke was Old Norse. And remember, Old Norse is also a Germanic language, and because of this new influence of many languages, we got a lot of common words that you might recognize today. for call, anger, weak, die, kid, are different possessive pronouns. There, they, them. All of these came from Old Norse, which was not Old English, of course, but was another Germanic language. And as we can see, a lot of these words are very common today. We still keep those meanings. Around 1066, so another few centuries later, marks a very important date, the Norman Conquest, where William the Conqueror came to the Brittonic Isles and brought his own language. They brought their own language, of course. So the Normans, what they spoke was a different language. It was somewhat of a mix of French and Old Norse. And it was at this point when we started to get a lot of French words coming into the language here. This is like the big turning point for English as we know it today, because this is the first point where we start to get a large increase of French words into our language here. Another very important letter we got here was this letter V. So in Old English we do not have this letter V, but we have this sound here. So can't draw. So we look at two words from Old English, father and heaven here. Both have the letter F, but there is a rule in Old English where normally the letter F is pronounced F, like always. But when we have F between two vowels here, we don't say heaven, we heaven. So we had the V sound, but it was not its own sound. We only pronounced V in certain instances, like between vowels here. But the French did have the letter V for words like in their own language here. That's why now, when we have words like feel and veal, these are two independent sounds now. So this is a big change in the phonology of English that was caused by the Norman Conquest here. Although we had this big flux of French words, Latin was still used in the church, French was usually used for the government, and the common folk kept using English because they didn't have time to learn this new language here. So we'll see a little quick history snippet of what this Norman Conquest was all about and why it was important.
The History of English in 10 minutes. Chapter 2, The Norman Conquest, or Excuse My English. 1066. True to his name, William the Conqueror invades England, bringing new concepts from across the Channel like the French language, the Doomsday Book, and the duty-free Gaulois multipack. French was de rigueur for all official business, with words like judge, jury, evidence, and justice coming in and giving John Grisham's career a kick-start. Latin was still used ad nauseam in church, but the common man spoke English, able to communicate only by speaking more slowly and loudly until the others understood him. Words like cow, sheep, and swine come from the English-speaking farmers, while the a la carte versions, beef, mutton, and pork, come from the French-speaking toffs, beginning a long-running trend for restaurants having completely indecipherable menus. All in all, the English absorbed about 10,000 new words from the Normans, though they still couldn't grasp the rules of cheek kissing. The bonhomie all ended when the English nation took their new warlike lingo of armies, navies, and soldiers and began the 100 Years' War against France. It actually lasted 116 years, but by that point no one could count any higher in French, and English took over as the language of power.
Yeah. So yeah, one of the most important points of English that influences how it is today here. Going on to Middle English around the late 1400s. So there was an important invention around this time, maybe you've heard of the printing press, that allowed us to spread the word around and to create another method of important communication. Although when you write something, you can't just write whatever symbols you want. You have to have some kind of standardization, because you can't just make up your own rules and have your friend make up his rules, because you won't be able to understand what's written. So standardization at this point was very important. One man that helped to standardize how we write English today was this guy, William Caxton, who was a writer, a poet. He was also kind of a diplomat for England here. And he was the one who kind of helped form how our words are written today. Because even in London itself, across two sides of the river here, a similar word would be pronounced differently. So you have two Some people said two on one side of the river. Some people said trois or something here. So he really just chose like, I like this one better. And then this one kind of fell out of existence here. So this was the word that got printed, and eventually people just started reading this more than this, and then this fell out of existence here. It's an interesting example of how the spelling of something can influence how we pronounce it here. At this point, we started getting a lot more Latin words, around another 10 to 12,000 Latin words coming into our language here. So again, the amount of words coming into English is just incredible at this point. So many different words here. Going back to another spelling convention that's very well known here, when we talk about our question words here, what, when, why, and stuff like that, you'll notice, of course, that we never pronounce the H here, there. But eventually, yes, earlier on we did. We had words like quat, juana, quer, quil, where we had the H first. But these French grammarians did not like the way we had the H first. They like to have the H in the second place, such as SH or CH. Seeing HW like that was just really weird. They didn't like that. So when they wrote down the words here for quat, juana, quer, quil, they started reversing the order here, where we have the W in the first part here. And because of this, this might have influenced the pronunciation that we have today. Some people do actually say quats. They'll make emphasis on the H here, even like quat, when. My grandma still says quat, kind of. So it's kind of weird, like how we do kind of keep a little bit, but mostly we say what, when, why. So just because of the preference of some grammarians, we have a different order today. Just again to show you how spelling influences pronunciation, which is strange. Like you don't normally see that, but this is one example where this was a where this phenomenon occurred. Further innovation in the 17th and 18th centuries, that is new discoveries, especially in the scientific world here. When you discover something new, you have to give it a name. So you have to give it something a name, and what the convention at the time was to take Latin or Greek roots and put those roots into the naming of this thing here. Just like all those elements here, like I said, taking Latin, Greek roots and making words out of that here. Why they didn't want to do it with Germanic roots, I'm not sure. But Greek and Latin, of course, are the classical languages. You want your discoveries to sound smart. So they were the languages that were chosen when we give names to these new discoveries and these new inventions. So I'm going to go on a little sidetrack, a little tangent for a moment here. So at this point, I want you to realize that English has gone through a lot of change because so many different languages, especially Latin and French, have influenced the language into what it is today here. But some people have wondered, and again, these aren't actual like findings here. They're just like people who had nothing better to do thinking of, okay, what will English sound like if we took all the influence of foreign words here? That is, what if we didn't have any French, Latin, and Greek roots in our language? What would English sound like today? And the result of that is called Anglish. That is English without any foreign influence from other languages here. This is just an idea. No one speaks English here. It's just a bunch of linguists who have nothing better to do but take out roots and think of words. First of all, I want to ask the question, is it possible to actually purify a language here? So there is one example where it kind of has happened already in a way. The Icelandic government has this policy of not letting any foreign words come into the language because they want to keep their language pure going forward. That is, no influence from other languages here. And in some ways, they have been somewhat successful here. If we look at this line here from this poem, The Lay of Thrym, we have the line written in Old Norse, which is a language that Icelandic descended from, and Icelandic today. So just looking at these here today, they are different, of course, but they are pretty similar here. Definitely closer than to what we can read from Beowulf. So the change from Icelandic and Old Norse is much less from English to Old English here. So in a way, they have been successful in keeping the influence of words down a bit. But of course, the internet makes that a lot difficult here. When you're on social media and everything, this kind of undoes all this work here, but you can try, I guess, here. And because of that, people who speak Icelandic can read their old tongue like much easier than we can. So one policy they had is creating new words. So I was talking about that problem earlier. When you discover something, you have to give it a new name. So the Icelandic government thought, okay, here's what we'll do. For all these words that have Greek roots, we'll take our old Icelandic roots or our Germanic roots and we'll remake the word into something new. They have this word rafmagin, which literally means amber power. It's their word for electricity. They have this old ancient Icelandic word simi, which means for thread or string. Today it means phone. So it's like one way of connecting here to there. That's your phone now. They came up with this noun, thota, from their verb thjota, which means zoomer. A zoomer is literally a jet plane, something that goes really fast here. And then probably the strangest one, we have tulva, which is a combination of Icelandic words tala and vilva, to mean prophetess of numbers. That's a computer. So it's kind of cool to see like how you can think of like create new words with these old roots here. So you can in a way like think of new words and for like new inventions here using your only roots, your old roots. So let's go back to English. Here are some proposed variants for words in English here. We have, of course, telephone from Greek telefoni. We literally took our English words afar speak. So this is a far speak, for example. Same thing with words like television. Again, vision is also Latin for sight. They call that a far see. So this is a nice far see we got here. Airports, a fly haven. A lot of our fields of study, biology, chemistry, geography, geology, all of course are Greek roots. Let's replace those with English roots. Let's make earth floor instead of geography. And also photography, let's put light writing, which is literally the roots, but just Germanic. That's what literally what it means in Greek too. Photos is light, graphi is writing, so light writing. So you can see how they came up with these conclusions. It just sounds really weird. And here, we're not going to go through all of this, but this is the preamble to the United States Constitution. Here is how it is actually written. Here it is rewritten in English, and it does look pretty different here. It's like kind of like riks now we have instead of states. 400 riks of America's land. It's just, I don't like it. Here's some other interesting and silly words here. History would be your lore. An umbrella is a rain shade. I like hurly-burly field for battlefield. Butter is cow smear. Sugar and beeless honey. See, there's just too many letters here. Just keep it the way it is. There's no point in changing it. It's just an interesting word. In reality, like I said, people don't actually do this. In reality, English likes to collect words. If it doesn't have a word for a concept, it will just take that word from a language and assimilate it to its own phonology here. We do that a lot for, like, for example, Japanese words. We don't say tsunami because in English phonology we can't have ts at the beginning here. So we say tsunami. We keep the spelling, just alter the pronunciation. Same with tsar. We can't say ts at the beginning, so we say czar instead of that. Some other words from other languages here. So I want to spend just a little bit of time looking at the points that we constantly remind you guys to not forget, and I'll point out why did these points even exist and how they came into being in English here, or at least the historical reason for all of these minute details. The reason, like we have already seen, English used to have a very complicated verb conjugation system, and as a result, the only trace of this remaining in modern English is this word s that we have in present simple positive sentences here. The thing is that when the Vikings came to when the Vikings came to Britain and brought their Old Norse tongue, it was hard for them to learn Old English here, so they kind of had to do their best to learn it. Because learning a language back then without any help or schooling is very difficult, so you just have to try your best to understand what was being said. So they tried their best, but things got simpler and simpler over time, and now the letter S is like the last remnant of that conjugation system. Another really unique thing about English is this continuous tense. When we say I read and I am reading, these are not the same things, and they have their own criteria when they can be used where. There is only, or as far as we know, there are only one set of languages here that has that similar construction, where we say I am, that is the verb to be, and then the verb system after. That is, we have that in, we see this in Celtic languages. Remember, when the Germanic tribes came to Britain first, when their languages mixed, we got words like do, I do not read, I do not see. And we also got these continuous tenses from these Celtic languages here. If we look at some modern Celtic languages today, they have the same structure here. I'm not going to read that, but I will tell you that when you have this double L here, it's like a sound. It's like you put your tongue ready to say L, and you blow air around your tongue. So it's like dashen or something. But they have the same kind of syntax in that way here. So the verb, or the pronoun, the verb to be, and then like this other form of the verb to. So that is that's where we get this continuous system from, is from these Celtic languages here, which we encountered very early in English's development. The verb to be is kind of cool too. It hasn't really changed its form too much. We have am, are, is. When we look at the past tense of the verb here, we can think that when we made these verbs plural, so that I was, but I wanted to say we were, back then all you did was put some kind of vowel at the end there. But there is this interesting phenomenon where sometimes when S is between two vowels, this S becomes an R sound. So at one point we might have said wasa, it's like we wasa, but then over time this turned into water, and then we just drop the vowel altogether, so we have this were sound here. So over time, just pronunciation rules change, and that's how we have such weird spellings and pronunciations that we do today. So was, wasa, water, were. This is one of my favorite ones to explain to people. Why do we have this random auxiliary verb will for the future simple here? The thing is that back then, Old English used to have this verb willan. Remember, it's a W, willan, which was our old verb to mean want something. And the logic was, if I want to do something, I will do it. I am going to do it here. So if you want something, chances are it's something that will happen in the future here. So over time, we started using the verb want as a future marker here. So I will do this, I will go. And eventually, it's just an auxiliary verb here, and we just have want as it is today. We know this to be true because if we look at other Germanic languages here, this is the verb to want in these other Germanic languages. And Swedish, Icelandic, Dutch, German, they all have this common root here. So it's not hard to see that this was once the verb to want, but now it's just the auxiliary verb in the future. And not just in Greek too. Greek underwent a certain influence like this too. For the particle for will, in Greek we use tha, which is a shortened form of thelo na, I want to do something. You just contract it and you get tha, which is their verb, or their auxiliary verb for will here. So it's not a far stretch to consider that. Alright, like this is here. When we think about the past tense here, of course we have quite a few irregular verbs in English here, but they do share a similar pattern. We have sit, sat, eat, ate. But why do we have go and went here? They are completely different here. Why went for our past tense of go? The thing is that, again, thousands of years ago, went was its own verb here. Go, of course, was an irregular verb. We have gone and eoda as in went in the past tense here. Went was this verb when done, which actually just means like to move in a certain way, like to turn or something. But it was a regular verb. But people back then thought, oh, this is too much to remember. This word, let's just take this verb here and then put it here. So the reason why went is so different is because it was its own completely different verb here. So, I'll say this now. Laziness is one of like the most influential factors in making language change here. People just want to make stuff smaller and smaller and simpler. Then you get too simple and you have nowhere to go. So then it becomes complicated again. That's usually how these cycles go. Not necessarily, but it's definitely a trend that we see. So when we talk about some other words here, like children, ox and brethren here, and was another way you can make nouns plural in Middle English. But of course, we're not going to say childs. We'll just keep children as it is here. Same with ox and brethren. And sistrum, which is more archaic. We don't ever say that anymore. Some nouns didn't decline at all in English here. So some animals like deer, bison, sheep, we say one deer, two deer. One fish, two fish, one sheep, two sheep. We don't make these plural here because they belong to a class of nouns that just did not decline. So we keep that conjugation together here. Latin, when we have all these Latin words here, we tend to actually keep the Latin conjugations when we make it plural here. Data is actually the plural. It's datum, one datum, but two or like more data. Same with a curriculum, a plan for the semester. We say curricula in the plural here. That is, this is the plural in Latin. We just decide to keep it because it sounds nice. Same thing with German here. Criterion is the singular, but the Greeks have a as their plural, so criterion, criteria. Same with phenomenon, but phenomena, and so on like that here. Speakers actually break their own rules, and because of them breaking their rules, languages can actually change into what we have today here. Did you know that the word book used to be an irregular noun here? I have one book, but many beck. But again, people forgot that that was an irregular noun, so they just gave it the regular ending, books. And now we have books as the form that we have it today here. Same with I. I, one I, but many I-in. Remember, this is that old Middle English plural. Now we just have I's here. But sometimes we can make things irregular here, which is even stranger. Why would you take something that's regular and make it irregular here? The point is that people like to make categories when they learn language, even when speakers learn their own language here. So when we have this verb squeeze, squeeze is a regular noun. I am squeezing my phone, but I squeezed my wrist in the past tense. But some people say squoze, because they say squeeze, squoze. Oh, because there's logic. It's like freeze, froze, because freeze is an irregular verb, but they try and find these categories. You're like, okay, so this must be irregular, even though you're making something that's regular into irregular here. So there's no logic. Same with the verb dive. The guy dove into the water. Again, you can say dived into the water, but people think it's dove from drive, drove. So they find other examples and they attach those rules to it here. Same with to plead. Plead, I pleaded guilty in this case here. Some people say pled from lead, led here. So they find irregular verbs and try to bring others into that side here to find some kind of pattern here. And again, just like that, languages will change. And last point here. Sometimes, even though the verb keeps, even though the word keeps its phonology, the meaning of that word can become completely different. Calling someone silly today is kind of insulting. Calling someone gloopy is insulting here. But back then, the society meant happy or blessed here, so it had this positive connotation here. This other word here, blestian, from where we get blessed, the priest blessed the water. Blestian in Old English literally meant to mark something with blood here. Usually it had some religious connotation, so that makes sense, but you can see how we don't mean mark with blood when I say, the priest blessed the water or something. This word here from Middle English, mistress, just used to mean female boss, owner, or teacher, but now it has this negative connotation of someone you're having an affair with here. So this is where we get a negative connotation here. Same with pretty again here. If you called someone pretty back then, that's an insult here because it meant something like sly or cunning here. But now it's someone who's pretty, who's good looking. And again here for a nice. Nice back then was foolish or dumb, but now it means just nice. So what prompted this change to go over time? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure here. But even I can notice some modern examples too, especially in slang. I was talking to my friends the other time, and they're talking about, like this girl say, "Is she bad?" I'm like, "What do you mean, is she bad?" Like, I don't know, I've never met her, but it's like for attractive here. So why would bad mean attractive here? That's just how language changes like that. So the thing is, it's impossible to predict how language will change over time, because we can look at trends in the past and think about, oh, maybe this will happen, but we can't predict the future here. So I feel like it'll be interesting to see what kind of English we'll be teaching here in the next 50 years, hopefully we're still here. So maybe we'll have to like rewrite all of our textbooks and everything. I'm sure we will. That's just the way it does. Yeah, I think I've tortured you long enough. Okay, sounds good. All right, good. That's good. All right, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
You said that we can't really predict the future, but can I ask you to? So you mentioned that like English is constantly changing and native speakers like to break the rules. So I was wondering if the same thing is happening right now with like if I was instead of if I were you.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a big one. Yeah.
Eventually, if I was will like become the correct form.
Yeah, that we've had that conversation here among the teachers here. Like in the books, we always teach you guys like if I were for all pronouns here, but who knows? Maybe in the future we'll rewrite it to accommodate the rules that we have today here. So yeah, it could be in the future. Yeah, maybe I was. If I was, that will become the standard for everyone here. It's not for now. No, that's not an excuse to forget it. Yeah, honestly, it's kind of hard for me. Like the only thing I don't like about teaching is that I sometimes have to say things that that seem kind of arbitrary here, because being a linguist, you look at how people talk and you write rules for that. You don't tell people, oh, you should only say this, you can't separate an infinitive, you should only say word here. You can write rules for that, but that's not how language works. Speakers will change the rules over time here. So yes, it is definitely possible that could happen further down. Any other questions?
Well, it looks like English has become widely popular and widespread because of its habit to accommodate many languages.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like, if you want to preserve your language, like they do in Iceland, then you'll be very close community.
Mm-hmm, yes.
So it's what you choose and that you receive.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I agree. And that's one thing. That's a good thing about English. It's not trying to like constrict itself here. It's just like whatever comes, whatever happens, happens. There's no point in changing or trying to keep stuff static, because that's not how it works. That's just like not natural to keep something in one place. It should always be changing. That's just how it works.
And it's interesting that this idea of English that you told us, maybe you've heard, we had a similar phenomenon in Russia. There were people who tried to preserve Russian and change all borrowed stuff with...
Oh, no, I didn't know about that.
Yeah,
is there a name for it?
Yeah, they're called, they try to change, for example, French Macintosh, like with something, Makrostup это было для резины. Makrostup, to change boots with Makrostup. They try to make old Russian words artificially.
Right, yeah.
Similar to this trend.
Yes, just like this.
But is there a term for this language?
It's
purified Russian.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, there is I just can't remember it now. Something like, this was a trend in 18th, 19th century. And,
okay.
Some linguists also, they tried to make it up.
I see. It's interesting. I didn't know about that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot.